Right now, investors in their 20s using margin are losing money at triple the rate of everyone else. And it's not just bad luck. According to analysis of roughly 4.5 million individual investor accounts at two major Korean securities firms this past March, 20-somethings using margin averaged losses of 19%, while their non-leveraged peers lost just 8% during the exact same period. That's not a small difference, that's a pattern, and it's showing up in data from brokerages around the world right now in 2026. So first, let's establish what's different right now, because the landscape actually shifted 3 weeks ago. On June 4th, FINRA's new intraday margin requirements went into effect, and they eliminated that $25,000 minimum equity requirement that used to lock most young investors out of day trading entirely. You can now engage in leverage trading with just $2,000 minimum equity instead. Brokerages have until October 2027 to fully transition, if they need more time. But the door that was previously closed to small accounts is now wide open, and people are using it. Margin debt hit an all-time record in April 2026, coming in at $1.3 trillion. That's a 6.8% increase from March and a 53% rise compared to last year. Since 1997, real margin debt has grown 503%, while the market itself has grown 338%, which means investors are borrowing significantly faster than the market is actually rising. The negative credit balance, which measures how much investors owe versus what they have in cash, sits at negative $871 billion as of April. So what does it actually cost to borrow on margin right now? As of last week, margin rates range from about 5% to 12% per year, depending on your account size and which broker you're using. Fidelity's rates run from roughly 8.3 to 13.3%, depending on your debit balance as of May 19th. Interactive Brokers continues to offer the industry's lowest rates, but even competitive margin loans aren't cheap when you're working with a small account, because you're typically getting the higher end of that rate range, not the lower. Now, back to that data from 4.6 million accounts, because it gets more specific. This wasn't just about people in their 20s. Investors in their 30s saw regular investment returns of negative 6.6%, but with margin loans, that deteriorated to negative 18.2%. So losses expanded 2.8 times. The pattern holds. Younger investors using margin are getting hit disproportionately harder than older investors doing the exact same thing during the same market conditions. The analysis covered just 9 days in early April, so we're not talking about long-term results. We're talking about immediate, systematic underperformance. So why does age matter so much here? It's not that young people are inherently worse at investing. It's that margin amplifies every mistake. And when you're in your 20s, you statistically have less experience reading market conditions, less capital to weather volatility, and less emotional resilience when a leveraged position moves against you. You're also more likely to be using margin on smaller, more volatile positions because that's what you can afford, which means bigger percentage swings on borrowed money. An older investor with a $200,000 account using 10% margin has completely different risk exposure than someone with $5,000 using 50% margin. And then there's the math problem nobody wants to talk about. If you're paying 8 to 12% in margin interest, you need your investments to consistently outperform that rate just to break even on the cost of borrowing. And that's before accounting for the psychological pressure of knowing you're trading with borrowed money, which typically leads to worse decision-making, not better. The classic pitch is that margin lets you amplify gains when you're right. But the data we're seeing suggests that for most young investors, it's primarily amplifying losses when they're wrong. And they're wrong more often than they think. Look, margin isn't inherently evil, and there are sophisticated investors who use it effectively as part of a broader strategy. But the evidence we have right now in 2026 suggests that if you're in your 20s with a small account, the odds are stacked against you in a way that's measurable and consistent. The new FINRA rules made it easier to access leverage, but easier access doesn't mean better outcomes. If you're going to use margin, at least understand that you're adopting a strategy that currently shows young investors losing at triple the rate of their non-leveraged peers. If this was useful, subscribe for more of these. Thanks for watching.